Hi, my name is Dr. Jeff Watson, and I'm sending greetings to you from the United States Military Academy in West Point, New York, where I am the Chair of Linguistics and Language Acquisition in a research center called the Center for Languages, Cultures, and Regional Studies. What I'd like to talk to you today about is my talk on promoting intercultural competence through transdisciplinarity. And in this presentation, I will discuss a curricular policy initiative that we have implemented at West Point over the course of the last 13 years and talk to you about the assessment and the goals and the assessment of the initiative. For this presentation, I am recording text for one slide at a time, and once that text is finished, you can advance the slide whenever you like. For this slide, I just wanted to give you an idea of our mission in our research center and the framework that we use to promote intercultural competence at West Point. We do see a synergy between foreign language proficiency, cross-cultural competence, and regional awareness. And we use this conceptual framework to promote our ideals, and this has been very effective in selling this program and selling the initiative to leadership. I know there's a lot of text on this slide, so I don't expect you to read it all, but this is again just background on some of the initiatives that we work on and have worked on in the center, just for your information. Okay, let's define transdisciplinarity before we go any further. And I define it here, and you'll see the text in red is what we're going to talk about for the rest of the presentation. Max Neef has an interesting definition of transdisciplinarity. And if you read this article, he has two versions of this definition. One is weak and one is strong. And the weak version of transdisciplinarity is really what we're going to be talking about in this presentation. And what he talks about is that when we work transdisciplinarily, we have to develop interrelationships across disciplines on four levels: empirical, pragmatic, normative, and value. Now, he defines these things with simple sentences such as, what are we doing now? What are we capable of doing? What do we want to do? And how do we do it? And by showing these levels, he's also showing that transdisciplinarity requires a layering of efforts across academic departments in synergy with leadership and the administrative side of running a higher institution of learning. So how do we promote this in the center and at West Point? Well, on the empirical side, what are we doing now? We were asked a few years ago to identify synergies across various academic departments where intercultural competence is being taught. Then we came up, we brainstormed ideas for promoting those synergies and getting buy-in at the institutional and departmental levels. We did a needs analysis in some committees, and that's how we decided what norms, what do we want to do, what are the norms that we want to promote. And we wanted to promote research, assessment, and interrelationships among and across departments. And after doing so, we wanted to identify best practices, what worked and what didn't work. On the value level, how do we do it? This is the most practical level, right? We decided to apply the synergies by creating cross-curricular threads and an interdisciplinary research center, which is my center. We also gained buy-in from the registrar's office and the academic counselors across the academy. And we know that we have to continue to integrate and promote study abroad and to leverage international studies. And again, this is like an agenda. I'll talk about each of these in a moment. Now, that's what he calls the weak version of transdisciplinary, Max Neef. His strong version of transdisciplinarity gets into the understanding of different levels of reality. and perceptions. And for example, the difference between knowledge and understanding, right? Those are two levels of reality that we need to understand. But he also wants to include what's in the middle. So this idea of becoming, from knowledge becoming understanding. And we have to understand what happens on each of those three levels of reality. He also wants to talk about things like the difference between brain and mind. Brain is one level of reality, and how it facilitates mind. Those three levels, the brain, the facilitation, and the mind, are his levels of reality. Really what he's trying to say, in my interpretation, is that we have to reevaluate what we are teaching, what we are promoting, what is the end result of a higher education. So on one hand, I think the weak version is like socialism, which is a necessary step, a very practical step towards the ideal of communism, right? We've never had a country that actually came to some utopian version of communism, but we have had some socialist countries that supposedly are working towards that ideal, right? Again, the weak version is more pragmatic. The strong version is more theoretical. The weak still is based on a system that is reductionist in its essence, whereas the strong version is pushing more towards the very complex ideal of holism. On this slide and the next slide, I want to give you just a brief overview of the historical efforts we have taken at West Point to internationalize our curriculum. In 2007, we created the Interdisciplinary Center, a research center, the Center for Languages, Cultures, and Regional Studies. That's where I got my job. And we are kind of the research and assessment wing that was developed at that time. We also created an International Intellectual Development Department, IIDD, we lovingly call it I2D2, and they are the admin and governance wing of our internationalization efforts. At the same time, we gained funding from the federal government to expand our foreign language core courses, and we started teaching foreign languages 5 days a week instead of every other day. From 2008 to the present time, we've been working in a lot of different areas. One has to do with study abroad, both short-term and long-term. And now we send about 400 different trips every summer to domestic and international locations for summer study opportunities. Many of those are 3 to 4 week long. And we also send about 75 cadets on a semester-long study abroad opportunity every semester. We also continue to do applied research in the center into study abroad outcomes. So at the beginning, we focused on study abroad, which was how we gained a foothold into talking about intercultural competence. The department I2D2 that I mentioned before is heavily involved in how we leverage our international cadets at the academy. We don't have too many international cadets, but what we do with them is we introduce them to clubs. We make sure that they room with a native speaking foreign language major, and we try to involve them and include them in at this level, at least with our foreign language majors, and make sure that we're introducing them as broadly as possible to as many cadets as possible. We've also been working on getting academy leadership buy-in to the program, not only the study abroad program, but this idea of promoting intercultural competence across the Corps of Cadets. And we've been building a base of donors through the Association of Graduates, which is like our alumni association. So we've been promoting this idea of intercultural competence, foreign language proficiency, and regional awareness, primarily through study abroad in short term and long term. That was from 2008 to the present. In 2016, we had done such a good job with our study abroad program, and we had published several articles on the outcomes and the assessment-based analysis that we have done at that level, that our academy leadership came to us and asked us the question, how can we increase intercultural competence for the entire Corps of Cadets, not just for the 150 cadets that go abroad every year, and not just for the multiple hundreds of cadets who go on short-term study abroad trips, but how can we improve intercultural competence in the core curriculum for the entire Corps? So at that time, we did some brainstorming in our goal team committees, and we came up with the idea of the cross-curricular threads, and we have several of them. And this is where we start identifying the synergies that exist not only across the departments, but also with leadership and with the administrative side of the academy. One of the first threads that was created was called the Region Culture Thread, in which we work with the Foreign Language Department, the History Department, and the Geography Department to align courses in the core curriculum. So in other words, if a Russian language student is taking Russian, they will also sign up to take the history of Russia or the history of Eastern Europe, and they will also take a geography course on the geography of Russia. That way we get the maximum benefit of this alignment, and we promote an interdisciplinary mindset among all three departments, right? So this requires buy-in from the academic counseling side, which is also carried out mostly by professors, and the registrar, which is also has to buy into this process. And that's where we get this idea of synergy, and where I think that layered levels brings in this idea of transdisciplinarity. Now, I'll talk about this last point in a second. In 2020, even after I submitted my proposal for this presentation, the Region Culture thread was merged with the Gender, Sexuality, and Respect thread, which is again something that works across various departments and necessitates the inclusion of academy leadership and the administrative side of things. So this is a new development, and I will talk more about that in a moment. Now, I won't read you all of the text on this slide, but I will point out that one of the primary goals of the Region Culture thread is to produce interculturally competent leaders of character, and that plays in with the goal of West Point as a whole. Okay, again, there's a lot of text on this slide. I won't read it all to you. I'll let you read that at your leisure. But in order to reach our goal, we looked at the student learning outcomes for each of the three affected courses, so foreign language, geography, and history. And we looked again for synergies that we are all working towards that promote intercultural competence. And we put together 9 learning outcomes, which are on this slide. Okay, so how do we assess the success of these initiatives? So far, we have a theoretical side and we have a practical side where we are trying to implement this thread with the core courses. But we needed to assess if this is actually making a difference. So I wanted to discuss just for a moment how we assess them. Of course, we assess language proficiency throughout our experience at West Point. So in the core, which is 2 intensive semesters of foreign language study, that's the minimum. Foreign language majors and others can go on a semester abroad in our semester abroad program. And we always test them with 2 in-house proficiency tests, the Defense Language Proficiency Test, which is the Army's official test, and the Oral Proficiency Interview, which is an ACTFL test. Now, we give our 2 in-house tests at the end of the first year of foreign language study and at the end of the second year of foreign language study if people continue on. The DLPT and the OPI are only administered before and after a semester abroad and upon graduation. Now, for intercultural competence, Currently, we use the Intercultural Development Inventory, the IDI, and we administer it pre and post semester abroad. But that is expanding, and I'll touch on that in a moment. We also have started assessing regional proficiency. Now, that might be a new concept that not too many people are speaking about, but we think it's important. And we also do that before and after a semester abroad, and primarily with language majors during their capstone course. Now, the Defense Department developed what they call the Regional Proficiency Analysis Tool. Unfortunately, it is not available to the public. It is something specifically for the Department of Defense, and it is a way of capturing foreign exposure or foreign cultural exposure. So if army personnel have been deployed around the world, this captures that experience and produces a regional proficiency score. Now, we have decided to use that tool as part of our Language, Regional Expertise, and Culture e-portfolio, which is now the major graded event in our capstone course. So the last semester that a language major has at West Point, they develop various projects, various capstone projects, and they capture it all in an e-portfolio that we are currently implementing for the first time. So we do a lot of assessment in the foreign language department. However, we also look to the humanities and social sciences goal team for how they assess things on a one step higher, one step more abstract level. And we also look at graduate can-do statements, and we recently looked at the National Survey of Student Engagement, and I'll talk about each of those individually. On this slide is just an overview of our mandatory core language testing program. So after first and second year, we administer 2 in-house proficiency tests, one of which was developed by the ACTFL organization and one of which was developed by Brigham Young University for us. And so we get good results from these, fairly consistent, very reliable and valid. And we use that for in-class, in addition to in-class assessment, which the instructors have more power and control over. But we use that for program assessment and curricular changes. On this slide is just an example of some of our language proficiency results from those 2 in-house assessments, which breaks the languages down that we teach, the 8 languages, down into categories 1, 2, 3, and 4. Categories 4 are our more strategic languages and take longer to reach some level of operational proficiency. And we don't set a specific goal for each of our languages because we know that some languages require more contact hours to reach proficiency, but we feel that most of our languages, after 2 semesters, that's 160 hours, contact hours in class, that we are producing a decent and admirable level of language proficiency. Now, for the study abroad program, the semester abroad program, or semester-long immersion program, we do a lot of assessment because, let's face it, it costs a lot of money and it's taxpayer money. We want to make sure that the taxpayers know that we are good stewards of their money and we are doing the best we can to build and assess a very robust semester abroad program that almost probably 98% of our study abroad programs require an intensive study of a foreign language while abroad. We do have a couple of areas in Singapore and in Japan where STEM focused cadets can go and study in a program that is based in English. But for the most part, most of our semester abroad students do study a foreign language while they're abroad. So before they go, they take the Defense Language Proficiency Test, the OPI, the IDI, and the 2 in-house tests that we have developed, and the RPAT, which I mentioned earlier, the Regional Proficiency Analysis Tool. During their semester abroad, we have them work on some reflection activities that is required, a distance learning course that many of our languages implement. We also have a semester abroad photo contest that is requires some intercultural experience, some reflection on an intercultural experience while they're abroad. And afterwards, we also administer the same tests again, including a post-semester abroad survey. Before they leave, there is a pre-SAP orientation where they have mandatory briefings on language, culture, and regional awareness, those things. And when they come back, we have them for an entire week where we have seminars and focus groups. We have them work on a digital storytelling project that is focused on a transformational intercultural experience that they had while they were abroad. And they give multiple presentations to the Department of Foreign Languages, the Geography Department, and to the academic dean. And this brief to the academic dean is one of our primary vehicles for selling the program and maintaining buy-in from academy leadership. And this has been a really great vehicle for us to do that. On this slide, there is a summary. In summary, on this slide is some IDI aggregate results from the fall of 2018. And just as an example of some of the results that we get after a semester abroad. And really what's important here, if you're familiar with the IDI, it has the Intercultural Development Continuum has 6 different levels. And we can show with our data that after one semester abroad, the cadets that start off in the denial and polarization area, that percentage of cadets is reduced significantly, and there are more cadets that move up into the minimization area and more cadets that move up into the acceptance and adaptation area. So we believe, and these are statistically significant leaps in growth. And I wouldn't call it a leap, but they are statistically significant growth. In other words, it's not just a small increase, but it is a statistically significant increase. All right, as I mentioned before, the RPAT, the Regional Proficiency Analysis Tool, and the LREC Digital ePortfolio are one of our newest initiatives. We are starting to implement that this year. And again, this is going to be part of our foreign language capstone course at the Academy, and it implements a Department of Defense talent management tool that then requires them to create a digital e-portfolio to back up what their regional proficiency is. So the regional proficiency is given to them based on a self-report survey where they answer questions about their exposure to a foreign culture. And if usually after a semester abroad, in theory, we believe that the majority of our cadets will come back probably with a level 2 on the regional proficiency scale. Now, what they do with that score then is in the e-portfolio that is part of their capstone course after they have returned from a semester abroad, they will upload documents that validate those scores. Because the RPAT is a self-report survey, that is one of its weaknesses. And so we developed an e-portfolio which the DoD can look into to see specifically what artifacts are they uploading into this as part of their graduate course, as their capstone course, that validates that regional proficiency score. So they can have their certificates from the OPI, from the DLPT proficiency tests. They can have some of the projects that they worked on in their foreign language classes or in their regional history class or their regional geography class or any class where some sort of organizational or regional culture is studied. So it's really up to them what goes into their digital portfolio, but of course there are some guidelines and some milestones that they have to meet along the way in order to validate the RPAT's score that they received. That way we have not only self-report, but we also have an e-portfolio that archives specific artifacts, academic artifacts that they worked on, and work products that they worked on to back up that test. Now, because the region culture threat is part of the humanities and social sciences goal team, the goal team also does its own assessment, and we work on that as well. The humanities and social sciences goal team is also led by myself and one of the other members in our research center. So one of the major findings that we found through our assessment is that all of the core courses that deal with either regional, military, or organizational culture are now including either some intercultural experiences through some sort of domestic travel or local travel to various places in New York or New Jersey, and or some learning modules specifically geared toward understanding organizational culture, intercultural competence, and so forth. The HSS Gold Team also looks at our graduate can-do statements. Each graduate must complete several surveys before they graduate, and where they talk about what they can do after receiving an education at West Point. And one of the main findings that we discovered is after we've implemented the thread, we see a higher percentage of graduates reporting and feeling more comfortable in intercultural environments. Now, recently, we also took a look at the National Survey of Student Engagement, which is taken by our first-year students and our graduating students. And we found that West Point cadets rank high or very high in the areas on your screen. So there's a lot of work there with interacting with members of different races, providing supportive environment for different ethnic and racial backgrounds, including diverse perspectives in classroom discussions. So we found that this was an interesting finding, and these numbers have started to increase after the region culture thread came into being. So we find that this is an interesting assessment that helps us judge whether or not we're doing what we want to do. Okay, as I mentioned before, this is the last slide. Just in this semester, we were asked by the dean to combine the region culture thread with the gender, sexuality, and respect thread. And both of these threads had been working independently of one another for a while, but it became clear that our goal, we have a similar goal, and that goal is intercultural competence. So we decided to merge, and we are renaming that thread the Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion thread, so that we can still talk about culture, either regional culture, military culture, or organizational culture, while at the same time talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion of minorities and various different populations within the West Point community. So that remains an issue for us, and we believe that even though there's not a strong focus on regional culture anymore, we believe that this merging of these two threads will give us access to a larger percentage of the core. And so we believe now if we take intercultural competence as a core goal, this will give us access to a larger contingent of the academic departments and will allow us to bring the IDI into more core courses. Because the GSR, the Gender, Sexuality, and Respect thread leader, is also interested in intercultural competence, but she was not aware of the IDI assessment that we administer and we have been administering for the last 13 years. So we're hoping to be able to use our experience with the intercultural development continuum to start assessing intercultural competence at more levels across more academic departments in the future. And we consider this a development, a positive development in this timeline. So that concludes the presentation. The last slide is just my contact information. Again, I hope that you can see how we strive for transdisciplinarity by identifying and promoting synergies across the academic departments in conjunction, in synergy with academy leadership and with the administrative side to deal with the very practical aspects of things. And because we have buy-in from all these different levels, and there's this layered approach, that's where we come up with the idea of transdisciplinarity, at least the weak version of transdisciplinarity that Max Neef was talking about. I encourage you to reach out to me at my contact information. I'd love to hear some feedback from you, and I look forward to meeting you in the future. Thank you.